Cool, now it's recording. So anyway, so I made a bunch of errors. I'm just doing this for the record. And we're now sitting on here with the virtual environment using the proper version of Python, or of Django. Cool. All right, so I'm in the login and registration. I'm going to make a directory for apps, and then cd apps. And then I'm going to, well, we can do touch. But for all those PC users, you can do null, open caret, initpy if you're using Python 3 or Python 2. You don't need to do this if you're using Python 3. But cool. All right, so inside of this apps folder, we want to make our users app or our login app or whatever app we want to make. So to do that, we want to go backwards and access the manage py. So we say // manage py. And when you use and go up a directory like this and try to access a file, it will actually run it if it knows how to run it, at least on Macs. So that'll actually be, that's the equivalent of saying Python and going up the directory.
That's for Macs only.
Is it?
No, it's
I don't know. I haven't played with it on a PC. I think it won't work on a PC. Okay. But then we want to do a start app, and we can call this thing whatever we want. So let's call this login app. Cool. All right. So we're good there. So now I'm going to go back up the directory and start up Atom. All right, so once Atom's up and running, no, I don't want to help. Sure, I'll help to improve Atom, fine. It is my favorite, after all, as you guys know. All right, so first thing we want to do, we want to go into our settings.py and make sure that we actually have access to this particular module. So to get access to that module, go into our installed apps, and we just add it, apps.login app. And don't forget that comma, because otherwise bad things happen. Cool. We can do Django extensions too. Extensions. Cool. If I can spell. Yeah.
What are the Django extensions?
What's that?
What are those Django extensions?
Where are they?
No, what are they?
They give you access to a couple extra things, including the ability to build out an ERD diagram if you install a couple of extra pieces, which are PyDot and GraphViz, which those installs are similar in pain to installing MySQL, Python. So you kind of have to do some tricks, but there's pretty good documentation online for it. And the platform has okay documentation on it. So it also allows you to see all your routes, so you can make a listing of your routes and do some other fun things. Cool. All right, so I'm just going to make sure all those things are installing. So I'm just going to go ahead, and at this point, I'm just going to start up my server. And I'm probably going to break it because I probably did something.
Run server.
Just one word, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so it's looking like it's pretty good. All right, so one of the differences between Python 1.9 and 1.10 is that session is slightly different. So you have to make sure you migrate to use anything with session. Anyways, that's the major difference in terms of things that we've been doing. All right. So now into our URLs. So I'm still in this main project. So this is part of my main project. This admin site, if you look at the Django extras, it'll tell you a little bit about how to use the admin site. But it's a way to look at your models and build things into your models pretty easily. I'm going to leave it there for now. And I'm going to make another URL route target. And that URL route target is going to go into my apps and then go into the login and add the login app. And the route that I'm going to catch with it is just going to be /. So you don't even need to do that, right? And we want to say include. And the thing that we want to include is the app that we want to include. So apps.login app. Apps.login app. And then it's a specific file within login app. And the file that we don't have yet, which is urls.py. So .urls. All right, is that going to work or not? Yeah. Yep, so we need include as well. Cool. All right, so that's so far so good. Let's just go ahead and check to make sure. Okay, so now it broke, but now we have this no module named URLs, and that's because we don't have this URLs in our login app yet. So let's make a new file in here. urls.py. All right, so that should solve that problem. All right, so now there's this circular import problem, and that's because there's no patterns in this app. So I haven't actually made anything in here. So Django URLs basic. All right, so now I have some URLs in there. I'm just going to clear those guys out. And this is basically start of a sentence, end of a sentence. So anything that's blank will go to this index method. Everybody okay with that? Cool. Speak up if it's not okay. Like, don't be shy. If you don't say anything, somebody else might have the same question and they're also shy. Yeah. Yep. So this name part is going to allow you to do a quick access. So you can imagine that we started here, right? So we started in this particular folder, this login and reg project. That led to this login app. But you could imagine, and this is a fairly simple app, but you could imagine this thing leading to another app, which leads to another app, which leads to another app. And so you want, rather than being like slash login reg slash, this name will give you a quick access point, so you don't have to do the entire routing. Did that make sense? So like when you're writing in your forms, your action equals /users, for example. If you had a complicated routing, rather than being like /user /first name /27, you might give that a name like show user, and then pass in a parameter of 27 to it. And I'll find that for you. Cool. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So now in our views.py, we'd want to make a def index, right? And right now, whoa, that's a little too much. That was my snippet for Flask. So, all right. So what does the index have to take? Quest. Cool. Thanks. Perfect. All right. So let's see if that's up and running still. Great. So still looks good. And let's just go to localhost 8000 and see what we've got. A whole bunch of nothing. Well, we got an error because we don't have an HTTP response object, which makes sense, right? Because we didn't actually try to render a template just yet. All right, so let's go ahead and render a template. So in this login app, we're going to just make a new folder. And I'm just going to start with new file and just say templates. So that's going to be the folder name. And then the Django strategy for doing this is to make another folder inside of that called login app. And the reason is when you start adding multiple apps, you want to be able to reference, so basically all the templates from every single app, it'll find this templates folder. It will take everything that's inside that templates folder and move it up to the top level. And so that way you can access login app's template from, your pictures app if you had two apps in there. So I could make another app in here like pictures, and I could make another one called like, I don't know, oceans or whatever. But all of the templates from all of them get moved up. This whole file or this whole folder kind of gets built up to the top level, and then this internal stuff gets pulled into it. So if we named index right here, if we said this was index.html, and in our oceans app we also had an index.html, those names, because all of the templates got pulled to the top, those names would conflict. And so by giving it its own folder, like login app, then it pulls this folder up, and it can find the login app's index.html versus the oceans app index.html. Cool. Okay, so now we've got that. And so that's just a way to separate different apps. So great. And our views.py, rather than passing, we can return, render, and what we're going to render is request first. And then we're going to go into the templates, but it automatically does that for us, so that's awesome. And then just login app / index.html. And I think I don't need this leading piece. All right, so hopefully everybody's okay with that piece. So let's just go ahead and take a look at that. So now if we go to localhost, great, an empty index.html page. Cool. So if we're going to do login and registration, obviously don't want just an empty HTML page. We want a little bit more than that, right? So we want a couple of forms. So form, let's call this first action.
What's the shortcut to do that?
I have Emmet set up so it's just HTML enter. But the other one that should work for everybody is exclamation point tab, I believe. But I don't know. Anyways, I don't know. It should be exclamation point. Yeah. So. Cool. All right. So we can make this one called login as that action. And our other form that we want to make in here is registration. So register as our other action. They're both already posts. Fantastic. All right. So cool. So now I can have an input type text. And we're going to register by email. So anytime you're logging in, sorry, we're going to log in by email. Anytime you're logging in, what you want to do is you want to make something that's going to be unique in your database. That's why a lot of sites have things like, hey, create yourself a unique username, like if you're playing Pokemon Go or something, right? You don't want to be able to log into somebody else's Pokemon Go account. Well, maybe you do, but the reason that you have a unique one is you want to be able to access a specific piece of information from that database. From that point on, then you're going to compare passwords. And if those two things match, then you can log in. So email is a good one because a lot of sites, as you've probably noticed, is you'll set up your login, and then rather than basically logging you in right away, which is what we're going to be doing, they'll send you an email and make sure that that verifies that it's actually your email address, that you can then access that email. So that way, if you've lost your password, they have a way to contact you. So email is a very common one to use. It's unique because everybody has a unique email address. Otherwise, again, getting an email to a non-unique email address, then everybody would be getting it. So an example is people send me email all the time because somebody that has a similar name to me can't input their stupid email into forms. And so I get things from like Tennessee where they accidentally put MJ Hannon at Gmail into their thing where their actual email address is like MJJ Hannon. It's really annoying. Anyways, if anybody else has that problem, I don't know. So, all right, the other piece is going to be a password.
So would you normally not bother to check to see if the email is unique? I add that whenever I build these because I tend to use the same test cases and I screw up my database if I don't.
Yeah, so I would have my email unique, forced to be unique in my database. And that also helps you, allows you to deal with find and get in the user manager. And we'll talk about that in a second. All right, and then the next piece is just going to be an input type of submit. And that's just, we don't need a name for that. We just need something that says something like login. All right, cool. I'm just going to stick all this stuff into an ordered list, just to kind of make it not totally ugly, even though it's going to be pretty bad anyways. All right, cool. And then we're just going to take that same thing and basically copy and paste it on over into our registration. But our registration is going to have a few more things. So we're obviously going to need an email, but we're also going to need like a first name maybe. So input text again. Sure. Maybe a last name. All right, so that's a reasonable login. But one thing that almost all logins have is they have a confirmation of password. So let's just make sure that confirm _password. All right, cool. So that's a pretty basic login and registration form. So let's go ahead and run that and see how that's looking. Cool. So now our forms, all right, so not the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but it should be functional. And we'll just know that the one that has 2 is our login, and our one that has 5 is our registration. We can put names on these fields using labels or placeholders or whatever. I'm pretty confident that you can all do that. So, cool. All right, so let's carry on from there. All right, so now our models.py. So we want to make a model, right? So, oh man, come on. All right, so here's a basic model. So created that with an auto now, true. Just when it's added, we want that one to fire. We want that one to fire every time we've updated it. Let's call this class user. All right, so what we want to store in our database is going to be a first name. And that's going to be a models, what type of field? Char field. And what do we need with a char field? Why do you think we need a max length for this thing?
Does it have a maximum amount of space that it allots?
Yeah, exactly. So the reason that you put a max length on this is actually memory allocation in your database. So it says, hey, don't set up your Postgres or your MySQLite database with an infinite amount of memory. Limit it to 255 bits or however many bits you want to have it. So, cool. All right, we'll have a last name. We'll have an email. What kind of field do we want to have our email as? There's actually an email field in Django.
What is that?
It just allows you to do a few extra things on it. You can do validation off of that email field. We're not going to worry about it too much, but we can look up the documentation for it. But it basically allows you to basically force it to do a properly formatted rather than regex email.
So is there pre-built validation in just calling an email field in the first place?
Yeah. But we'll make our own validation for it just because we can. But all right, and similarly, if you didn't notice, and this was an intentional omission, but in this email field, I didn't make it an email type field, and HTML5 will, at least some browsers in HTML5 will, if you set this as an email type field, it will do some front end validation as well. The reason I left it as text is because it's really annoying if you're trying to test your system because you can't pass in a wrong email. And so you never get to actually hit your validations because you're like, it just stops and it will never leave your page. It'll be like, well, you can't even, that's not a valid field. And it'll just give you an error right away, which is kind of nice eventually. But when you're trying to test your back-end validations, not so useful. I bored your Fang. Sorry. All right. So now we're on to our models. So what else we need is a password. And that models char field. And we're going to make this thing have a fairly long max length. Again, 255. And the reason for that is we're going to hash this password. And even if we had a password that was only 2 characters long, the hash that it generates is going to be around 60 characters long. And so encryption strategies are always changing. So Bcrypt is a pretty common one that a lot of different systems use that's fairly secure. It's really hard to reverse, and they keep it updated. And it does something interesting, which is the more you hit it, it actually slows down a little bit. So it prevents brute force attacking to some degree. So it's pretty useful. and we'll use it shortly. All right. I think that's a good enough user model for now. All right. So as is, we could make a user. We could say, hey, there's a user with the first name, last name, email, password. Happy day. All right. But we want some validations on this thing. So what sort of validations do we want on first name? Okay. So what's the... How do we do the validations for length? Can we do it straight from our model?
You have to do a manager.
Yeah, we do. Let's do a manager. But let's do at least one unique validation. Yeah. Never mind. We're just going to do it all through the manager. But Django has pre-built validations, which is pretty awesome. And so you can actually specify things like unique, true. And that's not the right syntax, so I'm not going to use it, but which will force it to be unique.
Are we going to go into that at some point?
It's in the third chapter a bit. Yeah.
So for the black belt test, which way would you recommend?
I would. My strategy in general is understand what you're doing, so do it with just using a manager. And you know, it's totally fine to just make a manager that works and then just import that app. So one of the nice things about Django, right, is it's very modularized. So the goal with Django is not to rewrite code all the time. So if you have a login and registration that's awesome, just import it. Don't rewrite it for a test. You wrote it the first time. As long as you understand what it's doing, just use it. Anyways. So, a manager. So, this thing's just a class. It's going to have some things that it can do. So, we could say, hey, let's validate login. All right, so this is a big note that I want to put on here before I even do too much else. Don't pass the request object around. So you know on your views.py, you have this awesome request object. And you can do like request.session, and you can do request.flash. And it's really tempting to take this request object and just send it on over to your models, modify it in your models, and then send it back. And it works. But the request object is big. It's a hulking beast. So that means you're having to pass around all this data. And then you have to pass it back, all this data. And if you're doing that a lot, and if you have a lot of users, that is going to slow your system down to an epic crawl, first of all. And second of all, it also kind of defeats this MVC model strategy because that request object is really part of your controller. So you don't want to be, you want to have these separation of concerns. You want to have your models separated from that controller. So you don't want to be passing pieces of that controller all the way around. So, all right. All right, so to our validate login, we might want to pass in some parameters, right? So we could pass in specific parameters, or we could just pass in those params being the request.post object. All right, so we're going to pass that whole request.post object. It's going to come in to that validate login, and then we can do stuff with it. So now all the pieces of what used to be a request.post is going to be params bracket like email, right? Or params bracket quote password. Because we passed in a request.post, it got renamed to params. It has a key, request.post had a key of email, had a key of post or password. Now params has those keys.
So is the view going to say request.post into an object, and then you're just going to pass that object?
Yeah. So request.post is already a dictionary type object. So we're just going to pass in request.post right into validate login. And then we can split it apart. Cool. All right. So to make a valid login, the first thing we want to do is say, hey, user equals user dot get params. Well, actually, let's use a find. Anybody know the difference between a find and a get? Okay.
Get flips out if you get more than one.
Okay. So get freaks. Okay. Gets one, and it's the actual object. All right. Get freaks out if you get more than one. And when else does it freak out?
You don't get any.
Yep. All right. Find, on the other hand. What does find do? What does it always return? So it returns a list. So that list could be empty, which would be finding 0. It could be one thing, so it could be a list of 1. In which case, your user that you want is going to be that first element of the list, which is that list bracket 0. Or it could get many. Hopefully it won't get many because we're going to try to prevent that, because obviously we don't want people to be able to log in with multiple emails. But right now we're just going to go and find that list using params. So the thing that we want to find is the email matching params bracket quote email. All right, that might syntactically be off. Is that an equal sign here? I think it is. Anything else that I screwed up there? Does that look okay for a find? We're going to call it good for now. All right, so now we can test whether or not this user is a legit user. So if user exists, so an empty list returns false in this case. All right, so if user exists, then we want to check to see if that user is a user that we actually want. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to compare to a Bcrypt event. All right, so we haven't actually imported Bcrypt yet, so let's import Bcrypt. Is it just capital Bcrypt? All right, so now we want to test this thing. All right, so Bcrypt dot what? Hash password or hash something.
Hash PW.
Okay, and then the first piece that we're going to pass in here is the actual password that we're trying to get. So this is what came over from our request.post object.
I don't think you need the underscore for hash PW.
Probably not. Cool. And we have to do something else to this thing. So in order for Bcrypt to work properly, we have to put it and make sure it's the right format. So we want to say, hey, this thing came over as some sort of crazy string, possibly. We want to encode it. Is it encoding? And the encoding is UTF-8, right? All right, so this is the first piece. This is basically say, hey, whatever we typed in, if we typed in our password like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is pretty much all of my passwords, then that's the starting piece. We're going to compare that piece to what's actually in the database. So user bracket 0, because we want to get that first person from there, right? And we want to say user 0 dot what? What piece of the user 0 do you want? Password. Because we want to go and get the thing that got stored in here. So this thing is going to return either true or false. Well, no, it's not. It's about to return true or false. So we want to make sure that that thing, what's going to happen to this thing? Sorry, I should clear this up. So this thing is going to get hashed. So it's going to change from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to a 60-character long string that's like AXU174385, you know, whatever, just random hash.
Should that be password or passwords?
It should be password. There. Thanks. And
why is the user 0?
right.
I thought user was just oh, it's just user. That's fine.
Yep, exactly. So right now this thing's a list.
So if we're using a try except, we would not.
Correct. Yep, exactly. So if you used a user.get and try user.get and it threw an error, then you know that user doesn't exist and you go that way.
What if you don't have that encoding? You just have encode empty friends. Will it just default to something?
I believe so. So if you just said encode and that should work. Well, let's try it. All right. And so going back to this thing gets hashed. And if these two things match, so this thing that was the old hashed password matches this newly hashed result of this whole function, those two passwords were the same. So it's something that's weird with all these encryption patterns. How deep do you guys want me to go into that? Okay, well, I can't go that deep. But basically, when you create these hash strings, this thing is a hash string, right? It's been already hashed. And inside of that hash string, it actually stores how it got encrypted. So maybe position 5 is part of this, what's called a salt. And maybe position 9 is part of that salt. And maybe position 13 and 21 and 82 is all positions parts of that salt. It'll actually strip those things out and say, this is how I made myself. Let's take whatever word is here, apply that same logic to that word, and see what happens. It's going to generate something. It's going to hash it. And then once it's hashed, if it was the same word, because it said, oh, I generated my craziness from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 the first time, is that craziness the same? Is what it's basically asking. So we want to compare that to user bracket 0 dot password.
How does it identify within the hash password what parts of it are giving instructions? Is it usually in one location or after certain strings?
It is much more complicated than that, and I don't actually know. If I knew, then Bcrypt would be a lot easier to break, because if you know the salt that came in, that gives you a bit of a grasp as to how to break that thing in the end. So I have not looked into it. Somebody out there probably knows how to break Bcrypt in terms of finding the salt part of it. It's doing some other crazy calculations. So
It's magic.
was it?
I said it's magic, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the goal with all these encryption types of hashes, they're made to be hard to impossible to break. As computational power increases, things that used to be taking years to break now take minutes. So that's kind of this constant war between how well people can break things versus how crazy you can encrypt things. Yeah.
Can you explain with people how come you put the encoding UTF?
It was just to force it into UTF-8, which is kind of standard characters.
How come you don't use that app secret key thing? Isn't that kind of encrypted?
So that is a hash. So the question here is, what is this thing, right? So this thing is a hash that's used for all of your session data. So it basically, you don't want to have people having access to this that are on your server, because if they had it, they could reverse. And this is a reversible hash. They can reverse all the session data. And so if people are putting in passwords and then somebody was spying on it from like some sort of keylogger, or some sort of, I guess, mirror, they would see some sort of hash thing rather than your exact keystrokes because of the secret key. So if they stripped out your session. So it's the same sort of idea, but it's reversible. All right. Where was I? All right, back to the models. All right. Cool. So did that part make sense, these two pieces? So we found a user. It's a list. If it exists, then we look at the first one of them, compare the two hash passwords. And if that's true, then we can say return And we could return the user, we could return a dictionary, we could return a bunch of different things. Let's just return a dictionary with a key of user, and the value is going to be user bracket 0. Otherwise, let's return an error that says user email or password, because we don't want to give them too much information, are incorrect. Or both. So something's wrong. Doesn't matter what. So we don't care whether or not they failed on this part, which would be this part here, or if it failed on this part. It doesn't matter. It failed for logins. Cool. So that's pretty much login there.
You send objects back and then you can figure out what to do with whatever object. Instead of just returning the user.
Sorry. Say it again.
So instead of just returning the user there, are you sending back the objects and then whatever's getting the return and deal with whichever thing the user was there?
Yeah, so this is just a user type object when it gets sent back. Yeah.
The strategy-wise.
Oh, why am I sending this dictionary back? Yes.
Yeah, instead of
Yes.
just sending user.
Yep, so I'm just going to query whether or not this key is user. If there's a user key in there, then I'm good. If there's an error key in there, then I'm not good.
What's that part that's in that little code that says it's type
Yeah,
thing? That's where that's from.
exactly. All right, so let's move on to registering. And again, we're just going to pass in some params. And in my video, I have passing in stargs. So, well, actually, quargs. So basically, if you put a double star in front of something and you pass in a dictionary, it'll unpack that dictionary for you. So it would come back as email, password confirm, all that stuff. And so then we could access those pieces directly instead of having to write something like params, bracket quote, password. That's all that was doing. So stargs, which is basically if you just send in a list, or double star, which is called quargs, will unpack. So stargs will unpack a list. Double star quargs will unpack a dictionary. All right. So anyways, for registration, I'm not going to do a bunch of the registration stuff, but we can do a bit of it. So let's do import re. Oh.
That happened to me with Bcrypt too. You can do REC.
Yeah.
You can do Bcrypt, RE.
I could do that, couldn't I? Good call. So we're going to import multiple packages. And I have a snippet for this. Let's see. Bcrypt, or what is it going to be? It's going to be email or something. Regex. There we go. Mainly because I can never remember what that. Yeah. And this probably isn't the best one, but it's mostly functional. All right. So for registration, let's just start with the first one. If email regex matches params bracket quote email, what do we want to do?
Don't we want to create a list to store errors?
Sure. So let's make an empty list for errors. Sure. All right. So we can say errors, and we can build this thing in a bunch of different ways. We can build it into dictionaries, and let's do it that way. Let's do the dictionary strategy. Errors bracket quote email. Not a valid email. Cool. Before we even start this whole thing, we could also go and try to get somebody with an email. So we could also say if, well, let's just go user equals user.find email, and we're just going to copy this exact find. And we can say if user. We could say errors, and just add the same error. So basically we found somebody in there that already has that email. So those are both the same type of fail, right? And then we do things like if params bracket quote first name dot length less than 3 errors bracket quote first name name is too short, right? So things like that. So, all right, so more validations. And you can look back at the Flask validations if you want to think about other validations that you can do. But cool. Now the next thing to do. If errors. So again, an empty dictionary returns false. So if there are errors, then we want to say return errors. Whoops. Whoa. Try item. That's, I guess, what you type if you type return one keystroke off. All right. So return, and we want to just pass in error or errors, and they're just going to equal that dictionary. So we're basically saying whatever we built out as this dictionary, like if we have email and first name in that dictionary, we're just going to send it on back. Else, well, we're returning, so it'll stop there. Then we can return user.create and just create the user and return it right in one fell swoop. So first name, yada, yada, yada. Right? So we could do all that. What else might we want to do before we do this little return? So for password stuff, what might we want to do? We don't have to match the confirm password just yet, but we may want to hash that password that we're just about to create, right? So we want to say new password equals Bcrypt and this is, whoa, that's not going to work so well. Bcrypt hash password. And we're going to pass in as the first parameter the thing that we're going to want to hash. Sorry. So params password. And this is assuming we've made all the other validations like password long enough. And password matches confirm. So those things are all valid. So we're going to hash this password, and we're going to hash it with a random salt. So gen salt. Is it Bcrypt gen salt, or is it just gen salt?
Bcrypt.
And that's just going to create a random salt for us. Awesome. And the only one that doesn't get passed in as, so first name equals params first name, the only one that doesn't get passed in like that is going to be the password. So password equals new password instead for that create. That makes sense?
You can set it as a variable too.
Yep, so we create this new crazy hash. So after this occurs, new password, so I'm just going to comment this out. New password is going to go from, I'm going to say change from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to something like that, right? Because it got hashed.
Just save the salt.
What's that?
Do we save the salt?
We do not. The salt gets integrated into this thing, which is what allows this event to occur.
How does
So-
it decode it without the salt?
Well, it's hidden in here. So this part might be part of the salt, and this might be part of the salt, and that might be part of the salt.
It figures that out.
Yep. Yeah, so that's just an aspect of Bcrypt that hunts it down. Cool. I think I forgot to do something here that was important. I did. So what has to happen for this param's password to work? Something that we did up here.
Encode it.
Yeah, we have to encode that one as well. Okay. Questions about that?
Yeah, why doesn't mine work?
That's a good question. I don't know. We have to check. All right. So now, if we call validate login or register from our manager, so from our views.py, it's not going to quite work. So we need to make sure that we add this manager object to our user models model, right? So there's a couple ways to do it. Initially, I wanted to make things clearer, so I said user manager equals a new instance of user manager, which is fine. But models by default have this cool little convenient thing, which is just a manager called objects. And we can rewrite that objects because all this models.manager is an extension of the normal default manager. And so we basically added this validate login and this register to the default default manager. So we're just going to overwrite that and say objects now, instead of just being its plain old vanilla objects, is now the user manager. So it has all the things like .get and .find and all those things stuck with it. Cool. All right. So as I'm looking through this, I apologize because I've not been doing this for a little while. I've made a few errors. So one error right here. So does my models.manager know what user is?
User stuff or user objects.
We could do it that way, but we already actually have user.objects. And it turns out that user.objects can be re-referenced as, so you're saying, hey, objects equals this user manager, and it turns out we just turn this into self. And same with up here. So user.find should be self.find and self.find here. So this allows that manager to be reused for other things if we wanted to make something that was similar to a login and registration that was doing some other things. So we might have like a login and registration for pets or something. We could just use this same manager and say, in our pets model, because pets obviously have passwords, right? My pet does. Okay. Anyways, but we could use that same manager and say, in our pets model, objects equals user manager again. And then that self would reference the user self method. Cool. Hopefully I didn't screw that up. Is self.objects? Anybody want to test it? Well, there's enough errors in here that it's not going to quite work yet.
You shouldn't have to do self.objects. You already are part of the object.
Yeah, I think it should be fine. Because it should be, I just want to make sure. So,
Oh, it's just self-upgrade.
I think it's self.create. Okay. So, again, this isn't totally finished. So you'd have to like get this to work. Its theory is fine, but you'd have to figure out a few more things about your validations. So add some more validations in here. And then when you get stuff back, we're going to have to deal with that. Okay, so the next piece. We're on to, or back to our views and our URLs. So let's start off with looking at our templates, index.html. So we have these two actions, login and register. So this leading slash, and Steve and I were talking about it earlier, or sorry, Eric and I were talking about it earlier. This leading slash basically says go back to home. So go back to localhost. And then basically start from the beginning, which is starting from this login and reg, take this urls.py, remove that leading slash. Oh, it doesn't match admin, so it's whatever else gets caught there, which is everything. Go over to the URLs, and then in that URLs, look for a pattern that matches that. So we need to match that pattern, URL, and we're going to start with, start with this string login, and then end. We don't want to catch anything other than login. We could do crazy stuff like if people can misspell stuff, I don't know, whatever. But all right, so there's that. We're going to say views.login, name equals login, or pogo, whatever that was about to be. All right, and we do the same thing for register. Whoa. Cool. All right, so we created these new routes that should be caught by our forms. And then in our views.py, we obviously have to catch those methods. Def login takes request, pass, def register takes request, pass for now. Okay, so let's try and run it and see how ugly this thing gets. Oh, so syntax error with a colon there. So obviously that's easy to fix. So it even tells us what line it's going to be on. So if we look at this very last thing, it says, hey, in login reg apps, the login app models, line 30, we have a syntax error. So models, line 30, colon, should be equals. All right, let's see if, all right, view is not defined. So again, URLs, line 5, login, views, it should be views, right? Views, views. All right, cool. Up and running, so no more syntax errors. As I said, it's not totally working, so. All right, but let's go ahead and give it a shot. See what happens. What's going to happen when we try to log in is it's going to throw an error because there's no template being rendered afterwards. So let's just make sure that's the case. Ah, okay, something else happened. Man, I don't know how to deal with that. CSRF token, what the heck is that?
Just copy and paste.
Yeah. So we can just add it. It's pretty easy. So we can. It already even tells us in the template there is a CSRF tag template missing inside my post. All right. So going back to our index.html, each one of these guys, top level, add ourselves a CSRF token. Add ourselves a CSRF token. Awesome. So now when we go back and try to post, now we're going to get this. I saved. Well, let me just reload this page. All right. Control C. But I did not reload the page, so I just went back. All right, so now it's reloaded. All right, cool. So there's the HTTP response. That was the one I was initially expecting, because we had pass in there instead of return, render, or whatever, or redirect. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys do this next piece, but this is kind of key in terms of just understanding. So I don't think it's key in terms of watching me do it, but I'm going to talk through it a bit. So in our views.py, all right, login. What it's going to do, we're going to do if request.post, or if request.method equals post. So we, all right. Yeah. So we're basically saying, hey, this thing's a request.post. So we're going to make sure it's that. So that way we make sure that we have this request.post type of element to come and pass around. So we're going to say user.objects dot login validation, whatever that method is in here. So we're going to go and grab this validate login method. And it takes a parameter, right? So going back to our views, post wrong views. So user.objects.validate login, and it's going to take this params, and the params are going to be this request.post information. Right. All right. So when it runs this thing, it's going to go off and run it. Happy days, right? And it runs off, goes over to our models. It runs all this stuff. Hopefully they all work great. And it's going to return one of two things. Number one, it's either going to return this or it's going to return that. Up. Sorry. That way?
No, the other way.
Down. Sorry. That's as far as I can go downwards. What do you want to see?
No, my saying Bcrypt logging. That's what
Oh.
Did you install the
Yeah, you have to install
I
it.
didn't.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a separate one for Django.
Where did you import it in the models file?
When you
Yeah, in the file. Should take mine, it won't work. Because I used it for classes.
yeah, no, so you need a new
You reinstall it. Yeah. Because it's a different virtual environment. All right, so it's going to return one of these two things. So right now it returns those things, right? And we're sitting in our views.py, and it returns to here. So whatever comes back, it's going to either be, an errors or a user. But what am I not doing here? So when it hits this line 8 right now, it basically takes that information and destroys it right away, right? It's gone. And the reason it's gone is we're not setting a variable to this thing. So we need to say possible user equals that thing, or whatever we want. So possible user is going to come back as a dictionary, and that dictionary is either going to have a key of errors or a key of user. So we could then do a test. If errors, or sorry, possible, what's the syntax for has key?
Key in.
Sorry, say that again?
If key in.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks. If user in, and if we're doing this a little bit more Pythonically, we might do a try and except. Then we want to go and load our successful, or if we're doing like a little bit more advanced, we might want to send somebody an email and say, confirm that this is your email address, sort of thing. But we want to do something if that's the case. And then else, the only other option is to have an error. And so we might want to do something like request.flash, and we can set some flash errors here. Obviously, we don't have flash yet. We don't have session yet. But we can import those. We don't have redirect, a whole bunch of other things. But so those would be your kind of two options as to what happens there. So it's absolutely critical to kind of understand the fact that this, when you run a method or a function that returns something, this piece gets replaced by that return. And I think you guys are good about that, but it's something that I've seen a lot in the past, and so that was why I emphasize it so much in Web Fundamentals. But I want to just re-emphasize that when you call a method or function that returns something, that method or function basically gets replaced by what gets returned. Okay. Cool. So then you do logic on that possible user, and then decide what you're going to do next. Cool. All right. Same idea with register. If login method equals post, fantastic. Then we want to go to our user object and do the login or the register and pass in request.post there. And basically, this logic can be pretty much the same. But you have errors instead of error as your flash messages. Right, because the register method in our object returns this errors type of thing instead of error type of thing. All right. Any questions about that stuff? So I know I went through a lot of stuff pretty quickly, hence the nice thing about having it recorded. But I'd rather have the questions on the recording if people have them. So, yeah.
Just an incidental, you mentioned request.flash for the errors.
Yep.
But in this case, it's for Django's messages.
Oh yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
That comes from the
Yeah.
trip.
Yep. Perfect. Thanks. Cool. And its behavior is similar to Flask messages. So, but you can do some other interesting things in there. So one of the things is you can set alternate tabs for it, and that's one way to kind of select through and look for, like if the alternate tab is first name, you can go and match it to your first name label. So cool. Other things that are worth mentioning here. I think that's reasonable, like in terms of getting people going. Hopefully I didn't make too many typos. I can slack this, I don't mind slacking those two pieces. So you guys can play around with it. I would not necessarily suggest just using the Slack thing because it's not complete, and rewriting it will really help you. And there's different ways to do it. So you could pass in a tuple that has true and the event, like whether it's true or false, if it has errors or not. That's another way to do it. You could use dictionaries like we did. Yeah. So either I was completely baffling, which is possible, or you guys are good?
Well, I have questions, but I need you over here. So.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
All right. So sounds like completely baffling. That's okay. So I apologize. But I'll send this out. So feel free to ask me questions afterwards. Yeah.
You were saying for like the register part, you're saying it's pretty much the same thing, but about the error. Can you explain what you were saying about the error?
Oh yeah. So right. So this one passes back a dictionary with error as something. Whereas this one its error option, like this thing can pass back either user:user, or it'll pass back a key that has errors that's also a dictionary inside of it. So it looks like that. Right, so we can just look at what the models return. And so the model's going to return either this thing, or it's going to return this thing. And this thing we can fix a little bit. Sorry, I should have quote user, quote, colon. So those are the two things it can possibly return. So it's either going to be this or that. Yeah.
So you probably talked about this earlier, and I wasn't listening well when you did. You were calling find instead of get.
Yes.
I can't find much documentation for find.
Yep. So the find stuff is just that find returns a list.
So it's like filter?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it one of those not documented?
No, it should be filter. Damn it. In Ruby, it's find. So I apologize.
I thought there was a new function there.
No.
Okay, so you want self.filter.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So let me just Control D that.
But if you're looking for a single user response, you'd get get.
Right. It's just that get you'd use a try and except to catch the errors.
Right, because you're going to get an exception if there's
Right.
user or
Yep.
or more than one user.
So I'm just gonna fix all those finds to filters. Thanks. Cool.
Two lines down. Where's the if Bcrypt?
On which line?
This one. If Bcrypt.
Yes, this one.
Yeah.
What the comparison was.
So let's say the question is, how does this particular line work? So here's what's going to go on. So we're going to pass in a string like password, and we're going to pass in a hashed password that's going to be something like right. This thing is going to have a salt in it. So that salt is going to be stripped out of there, and it's going to turn password if the initial string that was password was this thing. It's going to become that exact same thing. So that's what this part does. So basically it says, if the password that was passed in, that originally got generated into this crazy string, is the same word that's passed here, it's going to generate this exact same string. If it's not, like let's say your initial password was password and you passed in 52, this thing's going to turn into something crazy. Like it might be 1-2 still, but it might be like 56. So it might have turned into that when it got hashed. And so because this didn't match the original password that got turned into this new thing doesn't match this thing.
Let me insane so we can actually track it. It's like hash.
It's all specific, huh?
So what did the user and then the 0 underscore bracket, what did that mean? After encode, before password.
This thing?
Yeah.
This is that crazy string of the previously hashed password. Because what gets stored in your database is the hash.
Right.
And you can't reverse it. So the only thing you can do is take a new string, hash it exactly the same way, and see if they match. So let's think about this as like a potato masher. So let's say you're working at In-N-Out. Sorry, California thing. At some sort of place that has a very consistent machine that always does the exact same thing when a potato is put in. It always cuts it into 17 fries if that potato is, 4 inches by 2 inches. But if it's 4 inches by 3.5 inches, it turns it into 19 fries, right? So basically you're going to say, I'm going to stick this potato in, I got 17 fries out. If I stuck another potato in of the exact same size, you'd get 17 fries out. And you can't basically go backwards from those 17 fries and remake your potato, but you can see if 17 fries came out and 17 fries came out.
Different question.
Okay.
Can I use this?
Yeah.
So this one is already cached and stored, right?
Yes.
In here we cache the password again from the parameters, right?
Yep.
So should we compare this part to this part? What this part is?
So this is the fry generator. So this part says, hey, this is the machine that you put it into. But we can't actually go and get the machine. The machine is hidden inside of there somewhere. So it's like that part of it is the machine, this part is the machine, that part's the machine, and that part's the machine. So it strips the machine out, and then it turns it into the new hash.
Can you scroll down a little bit?
Yeah. We can go over that some more afterwards, if that's okay. All right, I'm going to stop the video there, but feel free to grab me afterwards.